Welcome to our study of the Buddhist Psychology of Awakening by Steven Goodman, an in-depth guide to Abhidharma. Now, the reason why we study Abhidharma is essentially to inform what we could say our Vipassana. Without properly understanding the mind, it's very difficult to proceed on the path. And what we do with Abhidharma is identify what's happening in our mind. Now, this actually does require something that we're not necessarily brought up to do, which is we need what's called introspection. And that's a very direct insight into what is happening in our mind. And even though we might be practitioners of several years and so on, it seems that we still get stuck on believing in the dictatorship of our mind. And when we proceed along the path, the key to awakening is really to see beyond the dictatorship of the mind and begin to discover freedom. And without actually having a way in to be free of the dictatorship of the mind, you could say, then it's very difficult to actually just be free. We'd like to say, I'm just going to, like Steven says in there, I'm just going to open my heart to the universe and be one with the universe. That's a lovely idea. And by all means, we should go ahead and do that if we can. But what gets in the way are impulses that are driven by our mental factors, which generally tend to be centered around me, ego. And so we operate with this, you could say, self-perpetuating cycle of acting on the basis of ego, which then again strengthens our ego and our sense of, you could say, alienation with regards to the other. So we are constantly influenced by the thoughts that arise in our mind. And so to be able to understand what happens in our mind and be free of it, we actually need to understand what these events in our mind are. And more importantly, we need to understand that they're made up, they're compounded. And so we don't think, oh yeah, this is how I feel. And then that sort of shapes how we feel about ourselves and the world. On the basis of how we feel, we very often just act. And we very often get stuck in a feeling or a space which we think is solid, which we think is real. We might have memories of things that have happened, or we might be worried about the future. And all of that creates certain moods and underlying assumptions, which we look are actually made up of a lot of different components. So the more that we understand how the events of the mind are constructed on the basis of a number of different factors, the more we're actually able to see the transparency, and the more we're able to actually see the constructed, fragmented nature of all these impulses and so forth, the mental events. And that's where we can begin to not necessarily immediately just go along with what we think or what we feel, but we're actually able to have some discrimination. And that discrimination or discerning is what we arrived at last time in the discussion of prajna. So I should see here. Yeah, let's just put that in here. So we're presently actually beginning to approach we've had a fair bit of, because they're a soft intro. It's a bit like if you join university or whatever, you have a sort of introductory week. We've had sort of a long introductory week here with the topic. And last time, what we arrived at was, and actually the introduction that we had last time is talking about the need to actually understand what makes up the events of our mind. And Steven was sort of comparing this with a barrel full of frogs. That's what's happening in our mind. And likewise, also, we could say we could understand the events in our mind a bit like if we are scientists and we study the building blocks of matter and the periodic table, understanding the elements and so on. And that's where Steven mentions how the Buddha is referred to as the great analyzer. And it's not because the Buddha was an intellectual or a philosopher, but it's just in analyzing, that's where we begin to see through the myths that we very often are held by. And so that's where analysis is really essential in terms of our progress or journey on the path, because it's on the basis of analysis, which is essentially prajna, that we begin to peel away the deception, the hoax that drives our suffering. So this sort of lack of understanding what's happening in the mind, this lack of prajna, is what drives our suffering. And it's when we introduce this dimension of discerning that we begin to actually free ourselves. So last time we decided that prajna can consist of, Abhidharma can consist of two things. One is basically prajna, which sees, and the other is then Abhidharma as the scriptures, as you could say, the set of teachings that we have. So just taking it from there, to paraphrase this, then Steven says, the word Abhidharma designates all discernment of dharmas, bringing about the Abhidharma. And just to sort of highlight that again and connect with the notion of vipassana and what we're doing in general on the path, becoming wiser. It is on the basis of, we could say cultivating prajna, we could also say allowing prajna, discontinuing our fascination with our identity, our sense of I am like this and so on, and basically just sort of blundering on the basis of our own sort of particular habitual way of doing things. We're actually introducing a dimension of wisdom. And that's where prajna essentially is what enables us to see clearer. We could say on one hand, prajna is the subject and the object are then the dependent arising phenomena. And it's on the basis of the Abhidharma that we then can begin to have a greater insight, a vipassana, an understanding of the dependently arisen nature of phenomena. So that's where the Abhidharma is the body of knowledge that enables us then to gain insight. And when we are gaining this insight, we're cultivating prajna. So this is very much tied up with our experience of practitioners. It's almost tragic nowadays that you very often have a sort of slightly ignorant culture, and this is particularly in the modern world, where people will say, well, I'm a practitioner, so all these studies, it's just not me. But the problem is, nowadays, everybody is so, you could say, driven with a lot of thoughts and our own kinds of analysis. So we might not study the Dharma, but we still continue to make all sorts of assumptions. And we'll have so much to say. And we can go on hours about all kinds of things that we think and believe, which is really sad if we're really trying to be practitioners rather than just rambling on about what we think and all of that. It would be more better if we actually directed our thinking and our mind towards actually that which helps us in terms of our practice. So that's where it's sometimes a little bit sad to have this notion that studying the Dharma is an intellectual, you could say, enterprise. Studying the Dharma like we're doing here and studying the Abhidharma is really what enables us to succeed as practitioners. And there's not anywhere in the Buddhist teaching where there's some sort of, you branch off and just become an intellectual. There's a danger of it, and everywhere there's a warning against doing that, because all the theory that we have in Buddhism is only intended with that sole purpose of setting us free. And so there's nothing in the Buddhist teaching which is just about theory. It's all essentially, you could say, pith instructions that enable us to understand the actual practice. So then Steven says, remember, the word abhi means making manifest direct perception of reality as it is. Prajna is the name given to that which makes that manifest, the direct perception of reality as it is. So we have this, the subjective dimension is this prajna that enables us to cut through the confusion. So thanks to prajna, we're able to begin to see things clearer. And that is then on the basis of, on one hand, you could say the theory that we provided and the Abhidharma, and then also then our practice of meditation. So Steven says, now we know something about Abhidharma in the absolute sense, and something about Abhidharma as a treatise. In this sentence, Vasubandhu uses the term Abhidharma in both senses. Vasubandhu continues, defiled prajna, whether it is innate or natural, or whether it's the result of an effort, the result of hearing, reflection, absorption, receives along with its following by convention also the name Abhidharma. Oh, I'm sorry, we actually covered this last time. I remember I was a little bit struggling with the notion of the defiled prajna, but I mean, that's also what I was saying before. Prajna is what cuts through our confusion. But when it's veiled, yes, then it's obviously not there. We could call it defiled. That's what I think it means. So I'm sorry, we're actually down here where I put the highlight. That's where it begins. Anyway, I'll just continue with where we are right now. He says, as he said last week, then, we also give the name Abhidharma to the way which prajna works when it's not pure. That means Abhidharma and this treatise also talk about the way in which our capacity to note distinctions is defiled. So you could say that's corrupted intelligence. We have two senses of the word prajna, two ways which we can discern the way things are, purely, which allows us to directly perceive reality as it is, and impurely, prajna in a defiled sense, which is the result of being caught up in effort due to hearing, thinking, absorbing, and so on in an unclear way. So, all right. So, Dharma bears its own unique characteristics. Vasubandhu continues, Dharma is that which bears, in Sanskrit, dharana, its own specific, unique characteristic. And that's also what this is where he says this is one of the senses of the list of 10 reference for the word Dharma. So we looked at that earlier. Yeah. Good. What Vasubandhu indicates here is that each of these 75 dharmas has a specific, unique characteristic. Previously, we used the analogy of atoms and quarks. We don't say, I think it was probably hydrogen, but maybe it was helium. I'm not sure. Anyway, there was a little bit of energy, and what does it matter? We learn instead to know the precise characteristic of the atoms or quarks and so on. It is rather the same way with the dharmas. Precision is key. There are concrete effects due to the specific workings of these various dharmas. Every love affair, every war, and every war can, at the level of analysis, be totally accounted for by these 75 dharmas. However, Abhidharma is not studied in order to make a full account of every war and every love affair. However, it does help us not to be surprised when love affairs sometimes turn into a war. This is the nature of defiled dharmas, of defiled prajna. This is actually very interesting because that is, once we understand this, we're never surprised. Let's say that we're buying a car and we get cheated. We actually shouldn't be surprised or even angry because it's predictable. Anybody who's in some sort of business, they're trying to make as much money as they can, as much profit as possible. There's not really anything that's surprising about that. So when predictably we get cheated in business, or people let us down, or things happen, we know this is just because they're under the influence of, one, the belief in their self. On the basis of that, they have attachment, they have all sorts of what we're going to look at here, mental factors. It can include laziness, it can include greed, it can include aggression, and all of these are natural part of subjectivities, consciousnesses that are not enlightened. So we should actually never be surprised if people act the way they are. Nowadays, everybody's sort of talking about the American election, and specifically one of the candidates, and everybody's sort of up in arms about, yes, there seems that one of the persons is rather addicted, one of the candidates is rather addicted to lying, rather addicted to cheating. But that's natural. This comes with the package of being a sentient being. There's nothing absolutely actually to be incredibly surprised about. So in that sense, when we're looking at, for example, if a mechanic looks at an engine and sees that it's not working, the mechanic doesn't throw up his arms and say, my God, this is dreadful behavior of that engine or whatever. That's just the nature of things. Wear and tear or whatever it might be is predictable. And the same way with the minds that we all possess, we're driven by the predictable self and all these various mental factors. Of course, now here in the context of studying the Dharma, we'd actually like to, you could say, keep a clean machine. And we'd like to actually not ourselves be driven into the suffering that's due to this ignorant handling and lack of prajna and so forth. So that's where we're presently looking at the mental events. But what we are looking at are simply just the factors that, you could say, run our impulses, our actions, our moods, our experiences, and so forth. So that's where there's that's where we're simply just beginning to understand what is there. Just like if we're scientists, we look at a particular situation, we discern what the particular chemical processes are, or if we're a mechanic, we understand what's happening in the mechanisms and so forth. So, like Steven says, this is where precision is the key. There are concrete effects due to the specific workings about these various dharmas. Every love affair and every war can, at the level, sorry, I've already read that, be totally accounted for by these 75 dharmas. However, the Abhidharma is not studied in order to make a full account of every war and every love affair. This we also said. However, it does help us to not be surprised when love affairs sometimes turn into a war. This is the nature of defiled dharmas, of defiled prajna. Now imagine you went up to your sage, your guru, and you said, "Oh, my love affair just turned sour." It's not as if the sage is going to say, "Wow, that's really shocking." Usually what happens is that the sage will say, what happened? And actually tries to make us understand what's going on. I was cheated. I bought this property and it was, it wasn't worth half of what I paid for it. Well, this is completely predictable within this world. So and so say they were going to show up and they didn't show up. Predictable. So in that sense, we're not at all about proposing that we shouldn't do something about it, but there's never actually a time where we need to be surprised or disappointed or even angry, because we live within the realm where everyone is driven by these, what we could call defiled dharmas. So like Steven says, it doesn't help us to be surprised or react. He says, otherwise, it is as if someone who is not a skilled doctor went into a room and engaged in a display of being shocked and disgusted by the full manifestation of the symptoms of an illness. Why are we shocked? Why are we surprised when someone gets upset? From the point of view and practice of the Abhidharma, and indeed the Buddha Dharma, when conditions are ripe, upset occurs. And when conditions are right, upset dissipates. And these conditions we can know. Dharma is that which bears its own specific or unique characteristic. So that is where we're looking into then the very sort of ordinary fact that if you have a spark plug, it's going to create a spark. If you have a alternator, it's going to do the job of an alternator. If you have a particular jealous disposition, that will do its particular job. If we have aggression in our mind, that will do its job. And similar also with those around us. So we are constantly actually operating with very predictable, what we then call dharmas that possess these unique characteristics. So then Steven says, to conclude this section, Vasubandhu writes, the Abhidharma is called Abhidharma because it envisions the Dharma, which is the direct object of supreme knowledge, or the supreme Dharma, which is Nirvana itself. Let's see if there's something to be said about that. So this is predictable. You guys are all familiar with my karma with Kindle. So things going wrong, that's no surprise, right? Okay, so envisions Abhimukha, and this is a quote from the Abhidharma Kosha Bhasham, the commentary on the Abhidharma Kosha by Vasubandhu. Okay, so here we're going to look at, now we're looking at these 75 dharmas. Now sometimes when I think this probably you've heard this before, but you know, we generally, when we talk about the mental events, we talk about 51 mental events, and here we're talking about 75. But this is because this, you could say, the 51 are more about mental events, but in the 75, Vasubandhu also includes other aspects. So so here we have 75. But you can see here he says, conditioned, unconditioned dharmas. Let us examine the chart of the 75 dharmas. There are two great divisions in this chart, right? Conditioned dharmas, 1 to 72. So we can see that over here in the left section. And then on this slim right section, the unconditioned dharma. So we have these two. This here, the section over here, the slim section, the unconditioned, has more to do with, you could say, the absolute nature. And this here has more to do with the reality that we generally experience. And particularly here, the 3 and 4, these are then what have to do with our mental events. So conditioned dharmas. The section on conditioned dharmas is divided into 4 major categories. So these are the ones over here, yeah. Forms, which consist of 11 specific dharmas, these here. Mind, which can consist of 1 dharma, citta, sem. Third column here, concomitant or working together mental factors, which are further divided into subgroups. See Appendix 1, column 3 for more details, okay? And then 4, elements neither substantial forms, column 1, nor involved in mental functioning, columns 2 and 3, which consists of true factors that do not depend on a truth or reality in a present moment of experience. So basically, it's not to do with mental events, right? These are presented like what we might call in physics laws that regulate the coming together of dharmas. So these are basically, you could say, laws or classifications. So these we have here then all summed up. There's forms and the dominant mind. There's the mind, citta. There was 11. There was one of these. Then there was the concomitant mental events. What was that again? That was, how many did we have? We had from 13 to 58. And then we have the relational or disjunct entities, midempe duce kishi, or citta viprayukta, which are then these, these are 13 factors, and then these last 3 factors, which are then the uncompounded entities. Okay, so Steven says, we will spend most of our time exploring those dharmas listed in column 3. We will address such questions as, what are the general factors of being alive? What are the factors that help open our heart? What are the factors that prevent us from opening our heart? What factors can be either opening or closing depending on the situation? And we will explore those dharmas listed in column 4 and address such questions as, what are the general laws that regulate this coming together and also their dissipation. So I'd like to express my appreciation for Steven, who's using some very gentle, after all, he did live in California, and the factors that help open our heart probably would fall into, generally be referred to in Tibetan as gewa, or virtuous actions. Essentially, what are the factors that are virtuous in the sense that they promote happiness, and what are the non-virtuous? So, but in sort of good California speak, that probably is what's here, helping open our heart and preventing opening heart. This is, by the way, just me speculating. Okay. Okay, just gonna take some questions here. Not being surprised with cheating, lying, how can we safeguard ourselves from turning into cynical people and seeing the world like that as the norm? Well, we have become cynical people. We already are cynical. The thing is, what we're proposing here is just to be non-judgmental really about it. And so it's not about being cynical, and us understanding the negative qualities such as cheating or lying. That's only one thing. We will also be able to see, you can see selfless action, generosity, courage, and so forth. So it's just understanding that how the mind works. And this we already do. We as adults, we already operate with that. We kind of suss out when somebody's unreliable. We kind of suss out when somebody can be trusted. We operate with that all the time. But what we are proposing here is beginning to see the world really as a web in which we, to more or less degree, then are driven by various factors, and particularly then understanding that these factors do not need to dominate us. So what we're doing here with this analysis is setting ourselves free, and also enabling us to understand others. And cynicism doesn't necessarily come from understanding this. You could say compassion could come from it. When we see somebody who's cheating and lying, we know that they're creating causes for their own suffering, that they inhabit this psychological experience of being a cheater, of being a liar. You could say they're punishing themselves because they have to live with themselves. So in that sense, it doesn't necessarily mean that we only become cynical. It also can very well mean we become compassionate. What is meant by conditioned and unconditioned? Well, we'll be looking at that, but you could say that something that is brought together on the basis of various causes and circumstances is conditioned, and things that are unconditioned, and we're going to look at that in terms of, let's see here, space, for example, we could say is unconditioned. But then you could say upset, factors of upset. There you have primary and secondary factors, and that's where we could say that our upset can be based on the fact that we haven't eaten, that we're jealous, that we're also, sad, and so forth. And that's why we can see the conditioned and unconditioned sort of working. So, yes, unconditioned dharmas. Here we go. However, all of these 72 conditioned dharmas are rather beside the point. If it wasn't for the very last column, those of the unconditioned dharmas, those factors which name the possibility of freedom and liberation from suffering. So that's where, when we talk about the unconditioned, it's also that which you could say is the underlies, or is the foundation for our entire reality. And of course, that also applies when we talk about liberation. We'd say that is the unconditioned ground nature, which, on the basis of being confused and not properly experiencing that, we then get tangled up in our particular predicament as sentient being. The ultimate nature would, by definition, be unconditioned, because if it was conditioned, then it would just be a passing phenomenon. So that's where just being, you could say, gratified temporarily doesn't really provide for happiness, and also just avoiding trouble and so forth wouldn't provide happiness, because these are just conditions that temporarily secure our well-being. So the entire journey in terms of the Dharma is completely setting ourselves free and arriving at this experience of what is unconditioned. So without that, probably no one would be interested. In order to give a full picture of all the Dharmas, in addition to the Dharmas that come together and go apart, there are 3 Dharmas that are not created and not conditioned. These include Dharma 73, space itself. In addition to space, there are 2 ways to understand cessation of suffering. Nirodha, namely Dharmas 74 and 75. So that's cessation. Okay, one sense of cessation, that of cessation with remainder, refers to the awakening of the Buddha under the tree. The term remainder is used to indicate that although his defilement had ceased, the Buddha continued to teach and be seen and heard by many beings for over 40 years. That is what is meant by cessation with remainder. The other sense, cessation without remainder, refers to the final nirvana or death of the Buddha, which leaves no remainder. So this is where there's a little bit of difference within the traditions of whether or not you would say the Buddha was still had karmic traces at the time of still living after being enlightened and so forth. Anyway, basically that's what we are talking about, enlightenment, and then you could say something that's unconditional. You could say objectively in terms of the elements is then space. So these are then these 75 that we're going to be looking at. So the coming together of Dharmas. Steven says, remember, everything that occurs is due to the working of Dharmas. So we might ask the questions, how come all of these factors aren't always working together all the time? What has to happen in order for some factors to lock into place, and what has to happen for those factors to be unlocked and no longer be working? How does impermanence work, and how does language work? The answer to these questions is listed in this 4th column. To play the Abhidharma game, this special mode of analysis, the answer has to be given in terms of Dharmas. Then to formulate the same question as an Abhidharma question, we might ask, which Dharmas are responsible for the coming together of Dharmas? Just by hearing this, we move into the technical way in which the Abhidharmika, the one who practices Abhidharma, thinks about these things. Okay? So when we are asking these questions, how come things are not constantly working? Well, that's just because we're not really drawing on them. And what we actually are looking at here is what is it that makes up who we are? What is it that makes up karma? What is it that what puts down, you could say, the imprints in our basic all ground? So right now, for example, we might not be experiencing intense anger. But then again, on the basis of certain circumstances, because we have the potential for anger in our all ground, then the experience of anger might arise, or greed, or jealousy, or pride. So when we're looking at the Abhidharma, we're looking at all the different things that is sown or planted within our disposition and within the all ground. That's the basis that really shapes who we are. And then on the basis of circumstances, then these various seeds these various seeds then mature. So acquisition and non-acquisition. The Dharma responsible for the coming together of Dharmas is 59, acquisition. The Dharma that is responsible for disengaging groupings of Dharmas is 60, non-acquisition. So let's just see what this is prapti and aprapti, okay? It's okay. So, okay, we'll be looking more of this in terms of as we go along. But it basically means that coming together for certain things, let's say that we have a sort of an intense irritation with somebody, and this person shows up, we could say this is the coming together and then the person leaves, we have the anger goes away. So these are what we then mean with the sort of the acquisition and non-acquisition. Birth. The Dharma that is responsible for coming into existence of a situation is 66, birth. Birth here does not mean birth from a mother, but the coming together of a new situation. If you think about it, it's strange that something new can occur. We have the habit of saying, I have a new boyfriend, a new girlfriend, a new job, a new teacher, a new understanding, a new kind of goat cheese, a new whatever. But that does not mean we understand its characteristics. From the point of view of dharmas, what is responsible for this experience is newness. It is 66, birth. So we have this all the time, also when we discuss, for example, the term bardo. We sometimes think of bardo, that means, when you passed away before you're reborn. But in fact, we have bardos that refer to our entire life as one bardo. And we could also understand bardo and the nature of bardo in terms of we go from one moment into the next. And between the two moments, there's a bardo. And then when we enter into a new situation, then let's say we're traveling from one place and we haven't arrived yet, that's a bardo. Then we arrive, we knock on somebody's door, we go in, there's a new situation. This is birth. This is walking into you could say a rebirth. There we are. We're going to be taking with us our personality and inclinations and so on. That's our karma, you could say, and that's what will shape then our engagement as we then walk into this new situation, engage with it. We do so on the basis of what we have from the past, but we are walking into something new. So this is what we could call birth. Fleeting stability. The other strange thing about experiences is that they don't immediately dissipate. They seem to be stable for a while. If we have a new boyfriend or girlfriend, this is good news. If we're newly unemployed, this is bad news. But to give a full presentation of a situation or experience, to say that it is new is not enough. It also sticks around for a while. In order to underline the impermanence of it, I call it fleeting stability. So there we are. Our friend has dragged us along to a dinner that we really don't want to be at, and then we walk in, and we actually have to endure this period. There's this fleeting stability of the situation which we might dislike. Then again, we might be invited into a place where we really want to be, and so then we actually are enjoying the fact that it's lasting for a while. For a while, we are here, and the general characteristics of this here situation is the sole ground that makes scientific investigation possible. Think about it. If it were the nature of all reality to instantaneously arise and dissipate, it would be impossible to engage in the famous repetition of the experiment. There has to be a relatively similar situation, a stability, in order to communicate or investigate anything at all. In fact, it is one of the hallmarks of mental health. Okay, let's see here. Michela, do you think you could switch on the light over there, just the light of the shrine? Thanks. Cool, thank you. Great. I don't need the other ones. Nah, just that one. That one. Okay. Thanks. Okay. I was just looking at the recording from last week, and at the end it was pitch black. This black face sitting, talking. So just thought better remember to have light on. Okay. When the stabilities of ourselves and another individual are not harmonious, when the rate of decay, remembering or reflecting is different among individuals, we say we're not compatible. It starts with something small like, the timing is a bit off here, it's incompatible. That is the seed syllable before we say there is a problem. And the full visualization of the samsaric practice is we must banish something. All of this comes from differences of stability. So here, seed syllable is kind of synonymous with the energy that moves us. So that's where we identify a particular, you can say, direction. And this is then where we have this fleeting stability then takes us to move on. That which is extremely unstable is often regarded as negative, as if there is some force that wants or desires things to be stable. We categorize things and situations as good or bad depending on their stability. If something is painful, it is good if it is extremely unstable. If something is pleasurable, it is bad if it is extremely unstable. However, no matter how stable it is, sooner or later, it will completely dissipate in terms of its current pattern. So this point Solzhenitsyn also makes when we talk about impermanence, right? We might think that impermanence is a bad thing. We might regret that now that we amassed a certain wealth or a particular agreeable situation, that it necessarily will change into something else. But impermanence is also good if we're unemployed or if something disagreeable is happening. Then thanks to it being impermanent, there's actually, you could say, hope. But as far as this fleeting stability goes, understanding how things eventually dissipate, Steven then says it won't disappear, it decays. And that's 68 then. So we're looking over here at these various factors. There's the birth, there's coming into new situations, fleeting stability, not lasting. And while it doesn't completely go away, it is what we then call something that dissipates or decays. So it undergoes a transformation to the point where its general characteristics are no longer appropriate as a full explanation. So there we are. We've sort of had we had maybe tomato plants, and at one point, but the tomato plants eventually sort of decay. It's questionable whether we can actually refer to sort of the withered, dried out, what's left there as a tomato plant. Steven then says, and both in India and in the West, great and lesser philosophers have wondered about whether or not what has changed is the nature and essence or only an accident of its qualities. The fact that there seems to be a movement from dharmas called birth to dharmas called stability to dharmas called decay is given the name impermanence as a separate dharma. So we can wonder whether or not this is something that's predetermined, or if it's something that just happens randomly. We can talk a lot about that. But anyway, the bottom line is that this is the nature then of this phenomenon. So this falls under this category here, elements that are neither substantial forms nor mental functions. Okay, let's see if there's some questions. 67, fleeting stability, brilliant formulation, but isn't 69 impermanence quite similar? No, these are actually intended to actually stand in opposition, even though this stability appears to be stable, its nature is fleeting. So you could say the term itself refers to that place where, you know, we've moved in. We bought a new house, we've moved in, now we've been living there for a few years, and we actually have a sense that there is some sort of stability happening. Impermanence hasn't struck yet, but then again, we might actually be aware that this is not an ultimately permanent situation, so we're aware of this phenomenon that it is fleeting stability. So you could say we're living on borrowed time. So that's how I think we should understand that in relation to each other. Yeah. So on one hand, the appearance of stability, and then the appearance of impermanence. Well, isn't everything fleeting? Well, exactly. Yes. But at the same time, we do experience some stability, isn't it? We talk about, having, sort of a sense of things. Oh, yeah, things are going well right now. They appear to be stable, right? We might have thought of times in our lives where we felt a particular degree of stability that was reassuring. We right now have, let's say we have a car. We'd like to think that this car works. We'd like to not think that it's something that could break down any moment. And so we are happy when we get in, turn the key, and it ignites, it starts. So that's where we operate with this notion of phenomena as being perceived as stable. Yeah. So impermanence. Here we go. Impermanence is the name given to the fact that all conditioned elements, all elements from 1 to 72, arise, stay for a while, and then decay. This is that famous impermanence. It is one of the marks of conditioned existence. Some of you will remember when Sansa Khensa Rinpoche was teaching here in Sydney in January. He talked about what we call the 3 marks of conditioned existence, which is impermanence, suffering, and lack of identity or self. In the Abhidharma, then, Steven says, conditioned existence consists of 72 separate analyzable factors. How do we usually understand impermanence in these contexts? Sansa Khensa Rinpoche once asked why so many people think that impermanence is bad. He then suggested another way to think. Imagine that my current situation of not having a Mercedes-Benz is impermanent. Expanding this sense, we can think that our current situation of not being a full and complete Buddha is actually impermanent. So we should simply just think of the fact that something's not what we wanted to do. That's also an impermanent situation. Things might smooth out, but then again, we're also, and this is, of course, you could say we are naturally equipped with an awareness of some of the things that we're talking about here. But us to actually have these as sort of laid down as clear structure is actually quite helpful. And this, of course, is where you could say us being exposed to Buddhist teaching and being trained in the sort of reflections of the Buddhist teaching, that is where it can be quite helpful that when we latch on to something that gives us some sense of, yes, now it's good, that we know that it's not going to last. We might think, now all is well. I've bought this house, everything is good, I've moved in, and then all of a sudden we find out that there are termites in the roof. The roof will come down within the next 2 weeks unless we do something. So then all of a sudden we have to redo the whole roof, or we discover that there's a water situation, or So this is where the more we're aware of this, the less again we're overwhelmed and you say shocked and basically suffering from circumstances. Okay, let's see here. I've noticed that when something is stable just around the corner, the next moment it all changes and somehow we are surprised again and again. That's exactly it. And that is insight. So when we know that we know when something appears stable and that it will change, that is prajna. That is prajna. And also what's good here is when we say, and we're surprised again and again, which is also that we have prajna, but we're also humbly aware how we still have this lingering, hope that things might last. And so it's true, we are surprised. And that's where you could say we have this humble situation of being sentient beings, we're still on the path. And of course, that's just that's part of being human, but it's also something that eventually the degree to which we train and the degree to which we train in prajna, to that degree actually we will be at ease when things change. It won't necessarily be that painful. That is, you could say, the nature of the path, that we gradually awaken to the nature of things as they are, as opposed to how we would like them to be. Okay. exploring the nature of self and reality. Ourselves as a stream. There is a great deal to study, and if we think this is boring and that we don't have time, I can hear Vasubandhu's laughter, because from the viewpoint of the Abhidharma, these factors are what we see whenever we look into the mirror. This swirl of jumping frog potential. So the comedy here is that we're talking about what's happening with us all the time. We couldn't find anything more relevant. And it also actually provides for a sense of humor, in the sense that we begin to have a wider perspective. So when we are predictably acting in particular ways, from the point of view of the predictability of this, there's a little bit of an aerial perspective that might allow for some, you could say, sympathetic empathy with us being driven around due to these circumstances. This allows for, you could say, a sense of humor and also a sense of compassion. So that's why Vasubandhu laughs. He's not laughing at us. He's sympathetic to our cause, but also realizing there might be sort of an oversight on our part if we consider this to be just pure dry theory. If we feel embarrassed or if we laugh, all those passing moments of embarrassment, laughter, and boredom are completely accounted for as simply the coming together and the dissipation of dharmas. So one moment we are embarrassed, the next we laugh, then we stop. This is what we are, a movement or stream of unending coming together and going apart. So we might be profoundly motivated to studying the Abhidharma one moment, and then the next moment we'd rather watch TV. So what is amazing, according to the Abhidharma and according to the Buddha, Steven says, is that we as that stream can know the stream. That's fantastic news. There are only two ways the stream goes: knowing itself or not. Whether we study the Abhidharma or not, the stream will still flow. This is actually an important point, and that is where you could say the human condition is one of those conditions where we can actually be proactive in terms of have that, what we could call, reflexive awareness, that we know what's happening with ourselves. We're actually, not only are we aware, but we're also able to actually begin to, you could say, interfere or be proactive in terms of then what happens with ourselves. So that's where us as a stream are not just an inanimate stream, but we have this ability to be aware of it. Stephen then says, in what follows, I'd like to say something about what it is to ignore the concrete subtlety of the various movements, okay. I'd like to say something about what it is to ignore the concrete subtlety of the various movements, why it is given such importance in the Buddhist teachings, what this has to do with self or ego, and why ego is considered the bad guy in Buddhism. This is good stuff, huh? So he says, but before, conditioned and the unconditioned, before addressing these very important questions, I'd like to revisit the distinction between the 72 conditioned dharmas and the 3 unconditioned dharmas. What do the terms conditioned and unconditioned mean? What do all of these 72 conditioned factors have in common, and how are they different from the 3 unconditioned dharmas? What does the un in unconditioned, such as the a in the Sanskrit asamskrita, mean? So samskrita means conditioned, and the asamskrita is then the unconditioned. And again, why should we care about these not conditioned factors? Without knowing what unconditioned means, we do not know what cessation of suffering itself means. How do we know whether we have reached the end of the road? To ask the question about what is unconditioned is to ask the question about enlightenment itself. Vasubandhu spends quite some time on this point, and he tells us that when he was studying there were at least 4 separate schools and controversies on this one point about the meaning of conditioned in contrast to unconditioned. Although Vasubandhu discusses 4 different ways of understanding the meaning of conditioned, samskrita, and not conditioned or unconditioned, asamskrita, he finally settled on what henceforth became the classical definition. Not is taken to be taken not caused, ahetuka. Not conditioned or unconditioned means that there was never anything that caused it to come about. Conditioned means then it does come about due to specific causes and conditions. Yeah. So this also we talked about earlier on, that which we're uncovering through the path is unconditioned, the unconditional, what we could call purity. That's basic to us, Buddha nature. So Buddha nature by is then unconditioned. And if it wasn't, then the enlightenment of the Buddha would but just be another mental event. So that's where we need to distinguish between then some things that are conditioned and unconditioned. So now Steven says, we might think that the study of causality, the dynamics of cause and effect in Buddhism, is the full and complete teaching. But we now learn that causality itself has absolutely nothing to do with those 3 not conditioned dharmas, since they weren't cause. Think a bit. This might mean that we can't produce cessation right. How can we produce a state that cannot be produced? How can we cause something that has no cause? Many thousands of pages have been written by Buddhists on this point, on this famous riddle of awakening, the cessation of conditioned factors. Well, I'll give you the hint at this point. See, we're not producing enlightenment, but what we are is unveiling enlightenment. So the whole project of prajna is for us to cut through our entanglement with all the conditioned factors, and without having to produce the unconditioned nature, we arrive at it without producing it. Just like we haven't produced a cloud-free sky. It's only that space is now visible because there's no longer clouds that obscure it, but we haven't actually produced space. Okay. Okay, let's hope I'll land on this one next time. Expressing realities, 2 traditions. We'll look at 2. I think we'll be looking into this from the Abhidharma point of view. But this, of course, is something that is a very relevant and question that also comes up quite often. Okay, any questions? Is this like Rinpoche's analogy of the dirty cup? Yes, exactly. The cup is clean when we just remove the dirt. Yes, and the thing is, we could say the cup is unconditionally clean. That's why we would say the cup is not really dirty. It's just that there's some dirt in the cup or on the cup. So when we remove the dirt, we haven't changed anything. We haven't produced the clean cup. We've just removed what was, you could say, extrinsic or apart from the cup itself. Yeah, that's it. The Dropbox link, please. You should have the Dropbox links. It's part of the mail that I send out. But if you haven't gotten it, then just shoot me a mail and I'll resend the link for this. But it's the same Dropbox links as usual. Yeah. If Buddha nature isn't cause, is it permanent? My mind gets confused here. Well, we would actually say it's beyond permanence and impermanence, because permanent is really something that's stands in relationship to impermanence. So it would be still a dependent factor. Whereas the very nature of Buddha nature as such doesn't really abide in terms of time and space, right? Let's establish that. But once we've gotten that down, you'll be very happy to come across to see when we discuss Buddha nature, we actually say it's permanent. So yes, but we have to be clear that that permanence is based on this understanding of the unconditional. Tricky maybe, but hopefully it makes sense. Is unconditioned the same as saying self-arising? Yes, and this is where it's so important when we engage in Vajrayana, and all the Vajrayanas speak, such as self-arising, spontaneously present, etc., etc. All the Vajrayana speak has to be understood in terms of the middle way understanding of emptiness. So that's where the whole notion of all the qualities of enlightenment, they exist as an expression of the unconditioned nature. So someone is confused about the time. When it's Mondays, it's Australian Eastern Standard Time, or daylight time right now. It's 5 o'clock. Sundays, when we're looking at finding rest in the nature of mind, that's 5:30. So that could be a little bit the cause of confusion. But for many years, it has been 5 o'clock on Mondays. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll just take it. We'll just do dedication. Let's see if I can find that. Mm-hmm. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. So we'll take a 2-minute break. Because today is the 10th day of the waxing moon, it's a Guru Rinpoche day, then there'll be a sok. So I'm going to finish at 10 to 7. So we're going to do a little bit shorter. I'm going to start the session with the Buddha sadhana at 20 past 6. So a little bit, starting that a little bit earlier, and then finishing a little bit earlier. So I'm just going to talk for about 15, 20 minutes on meditation, and then we'll start the practice. So we'll just take a 2-minute break, and then we'll come back. Thank you. Thank you. Somebody's saying, I don't think I have an updated schedule. This has been we've always done it at 5 o'clock. So when you have the mail I originally sent out to you, it will have the 5 o'clock time. Nothing's changed. Yeah, we're operating on the same usual time. Yeah. Okay. Just an apology for those of you who are logging on over from outside of Australia, because I was a little bit stubbornly insisting that nothing has changed. But of course, we have recently here, I can't remember, 1 or 2 weeks ago, we've gone over to daylight savings time. So yes, it is very justified if you are confused about the time. Yeah, so apologies about that. So I'm just going to say a little bit about the practice of meditation, which which really is the experiential component of the practice of the path. So when we in general in Buddhism propose enlightenment and propose a lot of things that naturally appeal to us in terms of what would be the right thing to do, we nevertheless come back to the very honest experience that we have. On one hand, we might have an ideal for what we would like to do, but we also have then what we talked about earlier, sort of defiled prajna or confusion, basically, that still drives suffering. We would say sentient beings all want happiness, and in some way that's an expression of their sanity. Everybody wants happiness. It might be the strangest ways that people want happiness, but it's nevertheless, it's basic to what drives us. And that's where we unfortunately don't always do or engage in actions that produce happiness. And that's where we bring about suffering despite wanting happiness. So we could say our intention and our actions stand in contradiction. Now, what we then propose in the Buddhist teaching generally makes a lot of sense: non-aggression, compassion, kindness, selfless action, and so forth. But it's not, it's actually, the problem lies in that we are, like we've been looking at here with the Abhidharma, we're somewhat programmed with a lot of different impulses and attitudes and, you could say, conditions that add up to us perpetuating causes of suffering. The good news is, and this is where the Abhidharma informs what we call vipassana. The good news is that when we're not driven by these impulses, when we see how they are conditioned, then we can be free of them. But in order for us to actually have the space that experiences or sees the freedom that we could have from these impulses, we actually need to have some degree of peace and insight and a space where we can actually look and know what's happening in our mind. So of course, to some extent, we are aware of what's happening within our mind, but there's also a place where we are unconscious, we're distracted. And so we have two aspects of practice when we're talking about Buddhist meditation. One is the practice of shamatha, where we provide a dimension or a situation of peace, where we actually are present and know what's happening within our mind. And then on the basis of our intelligence or prajna or insight, we train ourselves in not necessarily buying into these thoughts and narratives that continually present themselves in our mind. That's where we begin to have this spacious experience where we could say it's a bit like when the clouds arise in the sky, then the sky is not necessarily tainted by it. From the point of view of us fixating on the sky and looking up and saying, there are these clouds, yes, then we could say the sky is obscured, but the sky is actually untouched by the presence of the clouds. We would also say the ocean. We have waves on the ocean, but the depth of the ocean is untouched. So similarly, for us actually to begin to experience freedom from the agitation of the mind, there has to be a place where we disengage our fixation, our fascination, our entanglement with what arises in the mind. And this doesn't mean that we become passive. It means that we begin to become clear in our mind. The image here given is if we have a glass of water, and let's say it's full of sand and so on, and we then stir it, then naturally the water will remain obscured. But if we put it on a table, then all the sand or whatever it is, the particles will settle to the bottom and the water will become clear. And so similarly also with the practice of meditation, the mind clears. And it's on the basis then of the mind being clear that we can begin to discover this wider perspective. We can begin to see beyond the impulses and the narratives and the ideas and so forth that we ordinarily fixate on. So on the basis of simply settling, the natural clarity of the mind manifests. Now, meditation doesn't mean that we just become calm. Just becoming calm doesn't really necessarily help it. We can become calm when we're happy, you know, when we got everything there, we can say, oh, then we feel calm, but that's a very conditioned nature of calm. We can also just be calm in a very slothful and dull way. So meditation as sort of, you know, just becoming peaceful is not at all what is the purpose of meditation in the sense of awakening, in the sense of the Buddhist path to enlightenment. It can be helpful in terms of just being at ease with ourselves. That's great, and that's a very good thing. But in terms of actually penetrating the causes of suffering and penetrating the confused fixation on a self, on the ego, then we need to have this dimension of prajna. And that's where, when we can integrate this peaceful quality with what arises in the mind and train in not being carried away by it, not believing or buying into the, you could say, the mythology, the sort of the unsubstantiated belief that we have in some of these values that we attribute to things: good, bad, I like this, I don't like this is good, this is bad, and so on. That's where we fail to see the conditioned nature of things. That's where the vipassana is, when we begin to actually be able to just, you could say, allow these to arise and yet not buy into these belief systems. So we're aware of things as they are, but it's on the basis of our judging mind that we attribute things as being good and bad. So that's where we begin to be held by what then drives suffering. Now, in that sense, the practice of shamatha and vipassana is not something particularly Buddhist, even though this is what the Buddha recommended. But this is, you could say, just like heating water could be done on the basis of understanding the laws of physics, but it's not necessarily physics as such. It's just that physics enables us to understand the nature of boiling water and so on and so forth. Then you could say the application or the act itself is beyond anything that has to do with any particular system. It's really just us tapping into a natural intelligence that's naturally ours, and that's where the Buddha, you could say, he pointed to the moon. We shouldn't get fixated on the finger that points to the moon, but we need to actually see the moon, and we need to actually experience this for ourselves. And so you could say the practice of meditation is a little bit where we cut the umbilical cord. We begin to find a source of wisdom within ourselves. It's the discovery of wisdom as something autonomous within ourselves. We possess wisdom. But without actually practicing meditation, then we could have all these wonderful Buddhist books that say all the right thing, and the latest wise book from Pema Chodron or Mingyur Rinpoche, or we could have our shelves lined with all the works of Chogyam Trungpa, and we could have a lot of Buddhist stuff in our home, like some of us have, guilty party here. Then that in itself is not really going to help. And the only thing that really is going to have any real impact is us actually applying what's indicated in all these words of wisdom, and actually to discover this as something that's not just, you'd say, wise words we can live by, but actual direct experience that really we own by their very nature. So practicing meditation then is done It's not particularly vague. And of course, sometimes meditation is something where we say, well, I like to meditate in one way or another, but we actually have quite precise instructions. And from the time of the Buddha, meditation has not really been something vague that we just sort of went into. It's something very precise. So I'm just going to go over the very basics of the method here, which is sitting straight, having a straight spine, the shoulders a little bit back, the chin in, eyes, the gaze lowered, hands on our knees, relaxing the jaw, tongue to the palate. And we can sit on the floor, we can sit in a chair, whichever suits us better. Then we focus on the breath, and particularly we focus on the out breath. And focusing then means we direct our attention to the out breath. Our attention is what eludes us. Our mind, consciousness, whatever we choose to call it, that which on the mental level drives our focus, is then what perpetuates our fixations and beliefs and so on. So rather than just letting this run sort of amok or run astray, we focus the mind in the sense of just bringing it back to being present by you could say, the anchor of just having the breath as a reference point. It's not particularly sort of a tight practice of concentration. It's simply just coming back to awareness of the breath, and particularly then the out breath. As we do that, then whatever thoughts arise as we're sitting, we allow them to be there. We don't need to have any kind of strategy about letting them take over or being fascinated with them or doing something about it. We can just allow whatever arises in the mind to be there without necessarily being distracted from just being connected through being present through this relaxed relationship with just awareness of the breath. And so that's where the thoughts might arise as dark clouds, as white clouds, as large waves of the ocean, as little ripples on the ocean, wherever it might be. We allow the thoughts to come and go. So this is how we meditate, and we, like you know here, then when we do this in conjunction with the Buddha sadhana, it's enabling us to actually have some presence of something that is greater than the ordinary, you say, horizons of our mind, which very often is occupied with all sorts of ordinary, you could say, concerns, which don't necessarily bring about a wider perspective. Whereas if we think of the Buddha, there's very much a sense of something greater, and we very much connect with a greater dimension within ourselves. So we'll have, again, just a couple of minutes break, and then we'll begin the practice of the Treasury of Blessings by Jamgun Mipa Rinpoche, and then we'll do some sitting practice, and then we'll conclude the session slightly earlier today. Okay, so 2-minute break. Thank you. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness in the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering in the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. As the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel-lined throne and lotus, sun, and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, lion of the Shakyas, his body the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks, clad in the 3 Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture. His right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent, he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close sons, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the 2 extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your compassion, you embrace this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues of body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teachings, ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout the past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, I am accumulating now and will accumulate in the future, for the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space. May you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the 3 jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Te yadao muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yadao muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yadao muni muni mahamunaya soha. Deyatao 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 Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Om 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 Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance of multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to arise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. I prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas endowed with the divine eye of the sages, and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all lower realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms, and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas, I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created through the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who are in the 10 levels, in all the direction of the worlds, in the 10 directions, to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment and tamed the Maras and their hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dharma so that beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those, supreme among humans, to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away, and those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dhammadhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there are no truly existent individual beings, nor life force. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of the self. May I realize the Dhammatā where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping onto a self in mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity, free of advice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethics that is guided by rules, and an ethics that is completely pure. With an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, bodhisattvas do not remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, having become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness, and through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion-like, through the samadhi of the hero's stride, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra, may I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. through actualizing the three gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the three times, and the three types of knowing as well. May I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in the bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my intention be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramitas, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world, may the light of the teaching shine like the sun, may the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nata. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuya jagadukani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuya jagadukani nignata. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. Thank you for coming and joining in this, and shall see you again hopefully soon. So thank you.